Joined on the phone today by Andrea Swensson. She's the author of the new book, Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound. Andrea, how you doing today?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, of course.
Well, let's talk about the new book, Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound. People from around here, of course, know of the Minneapolis Sound, but a lot of players involved, a lot of research. It's great that it's finally all put together into one book. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it started with the question of where did Prince come from? And I feel like people tend to talk about him like he came from outer space or something. And I knew that he came from North Minneapolis in the 1970s, and I wanted to know more about that. So I started digging back into that community, into the music that was being made as he was growing up, and it really turned into an exploration of the African-American music scene starting in the 1950s and then going up to Prince's big breakout success in the early 80s.
Yeah, of course, a lot of people, they think Prince when they hear Minneapolis Sound. But of course, you know, as you've mentioned in your book here, a lot of people laid the groundwork for that movement. And most of them, I guess, really kind of go unrecognized.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a big theme I noticed right away. And something else that I needed to explore in the book was just that question of why. Why don't we know these names? You know, when we talk about 60s music in Minnesota, we talk about the Trashmen and the Castaways, and there's these bands that continue to be recognized, but there were artists that were equally talented and equally appreciated by their scene, like Wee Willie Walker and Maurice McKinney and the Amazers, and I just wanted to know, why don't we know more about them? So the book gets into not just their history as musicians, but also a lot of the racial barriers that were present in Minnesota, some of which persist today, and things that these musicians had to overcome in order to just find venues in order, you know, to play, to find studios that would record them. So the book is part music history, but also social history.
Yeah, and it is incredible to think. I'm sure a lot of people outside of Minnesota who've never been here, they think, you know, lakes and trees, Paul Bunyan, maybe. It's amazing that this style music was born here.
Right. Well, there's a quote that I use right in the opening page of the book from Dick Clark when Prince made his debut on American Bandstand in 1980. Dick Clark came up to him and said, "This isn't the kind of music that comes out of Minneapolis." And Prince gives him, you know, his famous side-eye look because, yes, actually it is. We just don't know about it because it had to be very underground, especially in those early decades when it was just forming.
Again, Andrea Swensson with us today. She's the author of the new book, Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound. And Andrea, I know you work on The Current and you work for City Pages. So were you able to, I guess, use those connections to not only interact with Prince, but a lot of the other key players of the scene?
Yeah, especially in the last few years at The Current, Prince had a really special relationship with the radio station. Starting back in 2009, 2010, he started getting in contact, and he would send music and have the radio station debut it to the world and see what his fans thought. So there had been this relationship developing, and then when I came to The Current in 2012, it was around the time that Prince was starting to be more active here in town and putting on more events out at Paisley Park and doing pop-up shows like the shows at the Dakota Jazz Club. And I started covering everything and writing really actively about what was going on, and I ended up kind of getting on his radar through that. So we started having this very kind of quirky and beautiful friendship where he would invite me to things, and we got to have meetings a couple times. And he was just a very, very kind and funny man. I really, really enjoyed spending time with him.
Yeah, and that says something. I mean, he didn't really have that sort of relationship, especially with the press. I know I spoke with a lot of people who have played with him, you know, like an Andre Simone or, you know, Dr. Fink and those type of guys. But I don't know. What's the process like when you're interviewing Prince? Is he basically no paper, no recorders, just have to be paying attention?
Yeah, it was tough. I knew that going in, thankfully, because I'd read so much about his other interviews. So I knew that he didn't really approach it like a typical interview. He didn't want to be, it didn't want to feel transactional, I guess. He didn't want you to just sit and scribble notes or have a tape recorder. So he wanted to have a conversation, and I knew that. So I just kind of tried to lead the conversation in areas that I was interested in while also just kind of keeping it very casual. And then at one point, about an hour in, I excused myself to go to the bathroom, and I just tore through my notebook, writing down as much as I could that was fresh in my mind. And then after I left that night, I went home and wrote probably 5,000 words, just stream of conscious, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then he said this, just trying to get it all down.
Excellent. I wanted to get your sense real quick, not really so much about your book, but just your work with the current and the local music scene, and what's going on now with Paisley Park and Prince's vaults, and a lot of people don't want the stuff to leave, and I just read it's been damaged. There's a lot of drama going on with that, and it's kind of sad that his legacy, I guess, is kind of getting, I don't know if you want to say dragged through the mud a little bit with all the legal stuff that's going on.
Yeah, it is a little sad. I mean, it's just, I know the fans really want more music, and they really want to support, anything that would come out from his estate. And there's just so many people involved that I think it's just naturally going to take quite a bit of time to resolve everything. But I was just reading about the vault, and, it seems so wrong to have it removed from Paisley Park, but also if it was being damaged, they said there was water coming into the room, and you could smell deterioration of some of the tapes, and that's history, that needs to be preserved. So I think it's good that someone's trying to treat it better and make sure that it is going to be able to be salvaged and digitized and available for people, because that's ultimately what I think the fans want, is to really preserve his legacy and make sure that this music's going to be there for future generations.
So are a lot of the other guys still out there? I mean, like, the Prophets or Hayes, a lot of those guys, are they still out there maybe performing around town?
Yeah, in fact, Prophets of Peace just played a reunion show last night at the Mill City Museum. There's another really fantastic book that just came out of Charles Chambliss photography, and they were playing the launch party for that. We had a celebration at the Fitzgerald Theater a few weeks ago for the launch of my book, and Wee Willie Walker performed. He was amazing. The Valbons reunited for their first show as a quartet in 36 years, which was really incredible. Wanda Davis flew up. She lives in Texas now, but she performed, and Andrea Swensson was there. And these people are still at the top of their game. I mean, they are just born and bred performers, and if you get a chance to see any of these artists, they're all just still so incredible. Especially Wee Willie Walker, he's been touring around like crazy, and his voice sounds exactly like it did in the 60s. It's really wild.
Well, with that being said, for the listeners out there, maybe if they're first reading your book and they want to kind of delve into this music, do you know a good place to start? I guess without having, thousands of dollars to track down all these old 45s?
I know, I have become kind of obsessed with trying to find these 45s, but they do get a little spendy because they are so rare. I think the best source is the Secret Stash Twin Cities Funk and Soul compilation. That's a really nice collection of the earlier material. And then for the later years, the mid-70s through the 80s, Numero Group put out a compilation called Purple Snow. So I would start with those two releases.
Well, and I wanted to get a sense as to how you even tackle a book like this. I imagine the research, you probably hear stories from somewhere and then someone else has a different take on it. Was it difficult to kind of keep the timeline on tack, and just get everything in place?
Yeah, I think I approached it I flung the doors open and tried to take in as much information as possible. And I did research for almost a full year before I even talked to a single person for the book. I really wanted to get an understanding just for myself of the timeline, as you say, and what records came out when and who influenced who and how everything kind of fit together. And then the broader social history, which I just really wanted to fill in my knowledge of that, the construction of I-94 through the Rondo neighborhood and the unrest that had happened in the 60s, because these were things that were directly impacting these musicians. So then by the time that I started doing the interviews, I was able to ask really specific questions about, what do you remember about this moment? What do you remember about this show, this record, that kind of thing, so we could get into the really, really granular details.
Excellent. Again, Andrea Swensson with us, and the new book, Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound, is out now, and It's incredible to think you mentioned some of the earlier stuff, with the Trashmen and those kind of groups. And then, of course, I know your book doesn't touch on it much, but you still have, the Replacements and Husker Du. I mean, there's a couple other books that can just come right out of that area.
Right. I know there's been a lot of local music books out, and I'm so happy about that trend. I hope it continues because I think it's just, especially now, we think that everything is just going to be available online and, I'll just Google that and I can learn more about it. But there's these huge periods of our music history that exist just in people's minds. And it's so important to get it all down on paper.
Well, and I know you have a couple appearances coming up. I read you're going to be at the Electric Fetus there in Minneapolis, and then maybe a bookstore or two. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Electric Fetus event is on November 29th. It's the Wednesday after Thanksgiving, and that's actually going to be with Chris Riemenschneider of the Star Tribune. He just put out a book about First Avenue. So we are going to be interviewing each other and reading bits from each of our books. And then I'm doing a couple signings in December for the holiday season. I will be at Moon Palace Books in St. Paul on December 9th. And then the Barnes & Noble in Roseville on December 17th. And I'm sure there'll be more to be announced.
Excellent. And I know the book just out, and of course you're busy with a lot of other things, but is there maybe something else coming out soon, or maybe another project in the works?
I definitely have more projects I want to do. My goal is to just keep writing more books, so there will be more projects. But for now, I'm turning my attention back to the Current, and I'll be doing, I host the local show there every Sunday night. So you can hear me on the radio at 6 p.m. Sundays on the Current, and I'll be just cooking up some good projects over there, too.
Definitely. Well, again, the new book, Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound, is out now. Amazing book. And again, Andrea, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, you bet. Thank you.
Bye.
And again, that was Andrea Swensson, and her new book, Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound, is available now. She'll be at the Electric Fetus on Wednesday, November 29th, and also Saturday, December 9th. She'll be at Moon Palace Books. So get a chance to meet her and check out the book, Got to Be Something Here.